Let's get some more reaction to this implementation with lobby group Solidarity's head of operations, Werner Human. Good morning and welcome to Newzroom Afrika.
Good morning, Maseshaba, and thank you for the opportunity this morning.
First and foremost, what is Solidarity's stance and why are you opposed to the bill?
Firstly, our stance is that we find the statement from the President to be unclear, to be vague, because the core issue we have is with the wording of sections 4 and 5. That affords the powers of the HOD much more than what is the spirit of the Constitution, the Schools Act, and the white papers that was drafted more than 25 years ago that envisages a new educational landscape for the country. We say there must be a cooperative governance model in schools where the SGB and the department plays a pivotal role, but that balance has been tipped in the wording. Secondly, when we go to the norms and standards and all the other documents that have not been updated or developed, we say the correct sequence of events would be that 4 and 5 should be deferred to allow for this process of the development of these documents. What has happened now is, and that makes it unclear, is that the Act has been promulgated in full, or it's still to be published, and you have these norms and standards that must be developed, and that creates a certain precarious position which we place ourselves in, because you've got an Act on the one side and then other documents that must be developed. So the one thing I would want to state that we take from this statement firstly is that the effect, and this has been confirmed by Minister Gwarube in her statement yesterday, and that is that these norms and standards must first be implemented and first be developed before actually the sections 4 and 5 of BELA would come into operation. So we say that would be somewhere where we would focus very strongly upon to make sure that that balance that I spoke about earlier is achieved.
All right, for the purpose of our viewers, could you provide specific examples of how this will negatively impact South African citizens, and particularly those in the working class?
Well, the Act, if it is as it is at the moment, what it says basically is that it makes a public school a state school. And that is the clear distinction I would want to draw what this does. A public school means that the community surrounding the school has a lasting and meaningful say to that specific community school. Secondly, we say that the wording of it does not advance mother tongue education. That is something that we placed on the table during these discussions, and more than 10 years ago when we started a campaign to advance mother tongue education in the country, because we say ultimately quality education and mother tongue education goes hand in hand. And we say that this bill actually, it crystallizes and it cements English as the language for public schools. It does not do anything to promote mother tongue education. And we say 4 and 5 must be deferred to allow for norms and standards on language policy to be developed and updated, to allow for an environment where more than 85% of our learners in this country today must receive education in their second or their third language. And we say that is not right. If we say our core contention is with the Principal Act, that Principal Act must be deferred to allow for these documents to develop. Now we've got the situation, we've got both these instances simultaneously, the Act being promulgated and the norms and standards being developed. But we say, to say concisely, that ultimately the specific provisions disturbs the balance between governing bodies and the state, and it makes the door open for, especially in Gauteng, where you have politicians there that is going out to say that Afrikaans schools in particular are the ones that are in the wrong, and we are going for them. And they create this narrative that Afrikaans schools got all of this capacity and they don't want to share. And that has been a false narrative that we've tried to combat as best as we can, to say that is not the case. They try to overshadow their own shortcomings, especially the shortcomings in relation to the lack of schools. We have 9 less schools in Gauteng in this year than it was 10 years ago. So to attack and shift the focus on Afrikaans schools doesn't do anything for the tens of thousands of learners that's not placed because of government inadequacies.
All right, norms and standards to be developed before implementation. What would that look like for you?
Practically, it would mean that the implementation or the working of Section 4 and 5 would not come into operation, and the Minister made mention of guidelines that she would develop in this regard. Secondly, the existing language policy is 27 years old. Through all of these years, since 1994, we have not had an updated language policy. So it's outdated and needs to be updated. The second one of the core contentions in schools, especially in Gauteng, is on capacity. So that would be the second stream of document that needs to be referred or updated, is the norms and standards for capacity, to say how must we think about capacity and also balance that with quality education. At the moment, especially in Gauteng, you have a situation where officials there do not have any regard for capacity, and they make the schools fuller than they can accommodate, and that hampers quality education for learners. And thirdly, there's admission regulations that speaks to feeder zones and the immediate vicinity and community that is around surrounding schools, and that is also unclear. So those three streams must be developed, and we are willing and adequate partner to ultimately partake in those endeavors.
And how do you think that the Act will affect the relationship between teachers, parents, and the government?
We think ultimately what it will happen is parents and teachers will systematically withdraw. And it won't be a withdrawal that would be willingly. It will be a withdrawal that if the state usurps more and more powers and more say of the community, because the community, we say, knows best what is the best for the school, because they live there and they take ownership of that school. When the state and the department usurps more and more powers, the incentive for parents and teachers to go the extra mile, that evaporates. And we've seen how it works also with if you look at other state-owned enterprises. The more the state takes control, the less initiative you have from the people that's closest to the problem to find solutions. And then you have a situation where we go ahead with more inefficiencies, less quality education, and you have a situation where the politicians get more and more say. And we at ground level see how our influence that we can have to better the school, and not only the school, schools within the community as well. Keep in mind that public schools also pay a service to the community at large. There's so many projects that they have, and they do it on their own accord, not because there's some other guideline that necessitates for them to do so. So you take away that impetus and that drive from communities to better their school and the community environment by way of this act. And that would be a devastating effect.
But Werner, don't you think, I mean, with all of this said, do you not think that by opposing the act, that solidarity is in fact putting the interests of a specific language or cultural group ahead of the needs and rights of all South African children?
No, not at all. If you look at all the Afrikaans schools, and that again was a false narrative that is being peddled, especially in Gauteng, and the narrative is that we are acting, our schools, public Afrikaans schools, are acting contrary to the Constitution, contrary to the Schools Act, and that has not been the case. I myself have been involved as an attorney of law in many cases in schools where we showed to the court how the powers of the SGB, how they exceeded their own powers and targeted a school. We have only 2 languages that have fully been developed for language of learning and teaching in this country. That is English and Afrikaans. So when especially other political parties speak about all the different languages and everyone will have access to these languages of teaching and learning, that is not really the case, because only 2 languages have been developed. And we say, in the spirit of the Constitution, you cannot go and diminish a single language, thereby establishing the English hegemony around this country. So we say Afrikaans we take up to less than 5% of public schools, but we are being made in Gauteng as the 100% of the problem. And that is not the case. So we say the correct approach must be not to diminish a language like Afrikaans, which has been developed to where it is now, and we must develop other languages as well. And there's another false narrative that's being peddled, especially in Gauteng, and that is that there are white schools, only white schools that are trying to protect. And there's not a single exclusively white school that you have in Gauteng or elsewhere in the country. But you do have schools which are they are parallel medium schools, and also which are single medium schools. And if you look at section 29(2) of the Constitution, there's a specific provision saying the constitutionality of single medium public institutions. So we are merely protecting and advancing what the Constitution already says. We are merely advancing the ideals and the preamble of the Constitution, and we are saying those who want to push this bill, which is a political bill in our view, do so with the view of diminishing Afrikaans and hiding and overshadowing their own shortcomings in this past administration.
All right, so Werner, we need some clarity here. You say that there are only 2 languages that have been developed in the schooling system in South Africa. That's English and Afrikaans. But developed in what sense? Because isiZulu is a language option that is provided in many schools across the country.
Yes, so that is very positive, obviously. And I think at university level, you also have the University of KwaZulu-Natal, which also has a subject for Zulu when you go to tertiary education. So what I mean when I say English and Afrikaans, I mean a full complement of curriculum, material, not only from the 1st to 3rd or 4th grade, because you do have subjects across the country in other languages, but that is very limited. What we want to achieve, and that should be the goal, to have our official languages developed to such an extent that you can have full education received in the different languages up to grade 12, and also provision made for tertiary education. If you study your learning from grade 1 to 12 and university in a particular language like Afrikaans or Zulu or isiXhosa, it does not mean that you are diminishing the role that English play in the society. You can actually become a better English language speaker when you have the advantage of receiving your full complement of your school program in your mother tongue.
All right, you make a very valid point there. Are there any other organizations or stakeholders that Solidarity is working with to oppose the bill?
There are many other organizations. The one that I can mention is called the Afrikaans Onderwys Netwerk. That is a language group. Broadly, they are organized right across the country. We also have, as part of the Solidarity Movement, AfriForum and the School Support Center. It's a school center that tries to develop further systems to better quality education. And then there are also further organizations within the organized educational landscape that's also part of this. And then there are parents associations. So you would find many of the organizations that support us are organizations that are focused and organized around communities, in other words, on the ground level. The organizations that oppose our position and want to go through with 4 and 5, you would see them closely linked to the state, closely linked to something, an organization that is very far from where the community is. And I think that is also a distinction worth mentioning.
All right, Werner, thank you so much for your time.